Hey, St. Louis Gardener here. I wanted to give you my conclusion of the experimental garden, the Back to Eden experiment that I did with the wood chips, growing in wood chips in 2017. And before I get into all the details and let you know what my conclusion is that I come to, you can see here in this video that the land, half of the area that I grew under wood chips, I tilled it with a rear tine tiller, and this is just a small cultivator to break it up and loosen the dirt up. So I did cultivate that. It had not had a garden there in probably 30 years, 40 years from what I was told by a neighbor. So I had to get all the massive root balls out. There was a lot of root balls in there. So I got all that tilled, and that's where we started putting the first wood chips. And this picture here, if you look at this picture here, this is the other half area. And this picture, and that's my son playing with a neighbor's dog. You can see the wood chips over there. There's still a pile. That's where I had a couple of truckloads dumped and spread them out. And I have 5 raised beds. You can see them with boards for sides that I grew in those first just to have some lettuce and things here in the yard where we live before I decided to do this experimental garden with the Back to Eden wood chip method. After watching the videos with Paul Gauci, seemed like the thing to do. Based on other things that I've learned about gardening, it seemed like that it would be a perfect, ideal way to garden, especially if you don't like to break your back. Bent over with a hoe in your hand, weeding all the time. So I spread that out, and just so you know, the 5 boxes there, the only thing I ever put in those was I built the boxes with chicken wire on the bottom because we have moles here in this area, and to keep the moles from crawling up into the boxes, and I put chicken wire around the boxes. Now I've taken some of that down because I really didn't have any problems in 2017 with anything getting in the garden. Did have one groundhog after literally in the fall when I wasn't even getting anything out of the garden. He went in there and got a few tomatoes. So didn't have any problem with animals, which was good because I thought the moles were going to be a problem. But I had those boxes there. I grew in those boxes probably since about 2015. So I spread the wood chips out, and you can see here that the wood chips in this picture, you can see the wood chips are very large. They were not small wood chips like what, if you watch the Back to Eden gardening with wood chips videos with Paul Gauci, the wood chips that he gets from the grinders, these just come from wood chippers. The grinders grind them into much smaller pieces, which would be ideal. So the pieces are, a couple of times larger than what a large piece of sawdust would be. Several times larger than that, but not nearly as large as you see some that I have there. I had some that were, sticks, 6-7 inches long, and chunks of wood. So I did not get the quality of wood chips that would be ideal, but it took me, for 2 years I was begging people for wood chips and I couldn't even get any. So I had to take what I could get. So here's an aerial view photo. This was taken from video from one of my drones, and you can see how the garden is laid out. And this was April 20th. So you can see the lower area in the top left corner of the screen. That was cultivated with a tiller. All the ground that you're seeing where those 5 boxes are, all the way going left to the sidewalk, I just put wood chips over the grass. And if you notice there, a lot of that grass turned green in April before I got all the wood chips spread. So I spread the wood chips literally over green grass. I did not put cardboard down. I did not spray the grass with saline saltwater solution or anything to kill the grass. I just spread it thick over the grass to where it would, and it did keep the grass from growing through. I do have some Johnson grass that I think that's what it is, but it's vining type of grass, and if you know what I'm talking about, it just keeps vining all over the place and causes real problems. Here's another view from the air. And in this picture, if you notice, there's a little square area kind of toward the under the word April 20th. There, you see that. I put some corn in that little thing there and had a little spot of corn. Put a little box thicket of corn there, and got a good amount of corn off of that. And I wanted to do that to see if animals, squirrels, we have squirrels and moles, and I wanted to see if I would have a problem. I want to see if there were any deer that were going to come up in the yard and eat the corn. And so I didn't have anything except, I think there were a few ears of corn low to the ground that perhaps a groundhog or a squirrel ate on. Other than that, I didn't have any big problems, and it was just with no fence around it. So I got most all the corn out of that. All right, moving right along to the next picture here, you'll see another drone picture. That's me and my son under the tree there, and taking video. I didn't know I was going to be using the video to document this. I was doing it with the handheld cameras, but I did want to shoot some video specifically of my garden just so I could document it for myself each year. I've kept photos and things showing progress of the boxes and things like that, but I won't get into that since you're not interested in the raised beds, but more the wood chips. So you can see how close I went to the edge of the road, and then I put a chicken wire fence around this entire garden area. Let you see the pictures here. Here's July 25th. And you can see July 25th, you can see how the garden is doing. The trellis that you see there, that's electrical conduit, the really cheap electrical conduit. And it's very cheap. I used PVC pipe. And the problem with the PVC pipe, which I made a trellis just like that and then put some just cheap string that you can buy, like Masons use or something like that, really cheap polyester type of string. And the problem that I had with it was that the price difference between using this electrical conduit and using the plastic PVC pipe is about the same, because you have to buy the 3 pieces of your of your PVC pipe, and then you have to buy your L's to join. You have to buy those joints to join the top to the pipes that go to the ground. And those joints cost you about as much as the 10-foot section of PVC pipe. So what I did here was I took the electrical conduit and took one end and took a hammer and just laid it on the concrete over there on the sidewalk or on the curb, and didn't take much to, because it's fairly soft. I beat the end flat for about 2.5 inches, and then I bent it over to make a L on both of the conduit pipes that go from the ground up. So I bent it over so they were bent over toward one another, and then I just drilled 2 small holes in there and took some stiff wire that you would use for like a coat hanger or a clothesline wire. That stuff is fairly cheap, so I had some, and I took the clothesline wire and run it through the hole and put it up over the top, let it spread around the pipe, 1 piece of wire on one side, 1 piece of wire on the other, and then took my pliers and tightened it down, ran that through those 2 holes on both sides. And through thunderstorms and everything with some very heavy cucumbers. Cucumbers grew all the way up to the top. That's what you're looking at in this picture here is cucumbers. I was able to have that just wired together and high winds blowing on it all the way to the cucumbers hanging on it. I had no issues with it moving. The pipe at the bottom in the ground, I bought 18-inch steel rebar and drove them in the ground so that about, maybe 3 to about maybe 4 inches sticks up out of the dirt. And I just sat the conduit on top of that steel rebar. And so these conduit actually go down to just where the dirt is. So this is literally right at 10 feet high. And like I said, I had cucumbers that ran all the way to the top, and had some great cucumbers, as you're seeing in the pictures there. Then you can see our wildflowers in this picture here, July 25th, 2017. And the closest thing to you there is purple hull peas. And I planted a few. I planted one box of purple hull peas, and then I put a couple right there. Those right there actually came up. I don't know how the seeds even got there. I just didn't pull them up. They didn't crowd my beans. They came up between the end of the row of my wildflowers and my cucumbers, and I just let them grow. And some of the runners ran over to my cucumber trellis and ran all the way up 10 feet high on that. Of course, cucumbers were long gone by the time they got on my trellis over there. And you can see in the foreground, those very tall plants are okra. The very short plants there in that open area are Ford Hook lima beans. We like to grow those, and we like to eat those. So there's a good picture of these rows here are Ford Hook lima beans. That table I have some corn, which I ended up doing nothing with it. It was just extra because I put corn out in the yard here in the yard garden, and I planted a lot of extra, so I didn't even use those. And that's July 25th, and there's okra, as you can see. Some of the okra on the very ends, that okra there is about 3.5 feet tall, and the okra in the back's probably about 5 feet, maybe a little above 5 feet. In this picture, you can see something interesting that I want to point out. The okra that's in the box, that bunch of okra plants, I just broadcast seeds in there and let them grow up. And I had a lot in there that were smaller, and I pulled them out as I noticed that they were not going to be able to get up and get any light. So the point of me taking that picture there is I wanted to show the height of the ones grown in the compost was much higher, and they grew much faster and higher, and they were planted on the exact date that the first two rows above the word July 25th, those two rows there on the end by the word July 25th, 2017, those two rows and that box were all the seeds were planted at the same time. And I germinated the seeds in warm water about 20 hours before I planted them, so they were already popping open. And the ones in the box throughout the whole growing season consistently were larger, taller, and greener, growing in a box that has only had compost added to it each year. So that tells you a lot about compost. And going back to what Paul Gauci said, his chickens make his compost he feeds them greens from his garden, and of course they poop in it, so their manure is adding small amounts of nitrogen considering the volume of food that's in there that they're eating. So he ends up with a wonderful, perfect, not hot fertilizer compost, but has a little nitrogen, maybe just slightly more than you'd get in a compost pile that you would do or compost that you would buy. So growing in compost is, I'm convinced by my own experiments, and you're seeing the evidence of one of them there. Compost and then cover with the wood chips, and you are going to have the best possible setup for wherever you are growing. Now, we had very hot, dry summer in 2017. And I mean very dry. I doubt we got an inch of rain from June until November in the city where we live. So it was that dry. I did have to water some tomato plants that I planted very shallow, but that's because I planted them shallow, and we still got plenty of tomatoes, but they did not thrive. And I wanted to see how they would do planted shallow in dirt, but covered with the wood chips. They did okay. I did have to water them. They did get a little dry, but I only had to water a little bit. I didn't have to water it on a daily basis. And we're talking about a summer where we got almost no rainfall here. So other people's gardens here did not do very well in my neighborhood close by that grow. They had problems because it was so dry. Here you see my corn, July 25th, 2017. It's doing pretty good. And we did get a good amount of corn from just that small patch there. So and there's my tomato plants that I had out. And if you see them in these, I don't know if I got a picture loaded, but you probably think, wow, yours did great. But I'm sure if I would have dug a much larger hole. You know, you can't bury too much of your tomato plant, regardless of how much you bury above where the dirt level is on the plant when you buy it, or if you raise them from seed. You can bury the plant all the way up to just, as long as there's a few leaves sticking, you know, 2 inches out of the ground or out of the dirt, you're fine. All that under the dirt that has leaves, all that will shoot roots out, and that's just what type of vining plant it is, and you'll have many more roots. And roots is the foundation for the plant's ability to take up nutrients, and that's going to equal a very healthy plant. And I always say a very, very healthy plant is better than having a lot of not so healthy plants. A healthy plant will do what it's supposed to do. You'll get a good yield. So that's the tomato plants. We did pretty good. Here you get another view. There you can see the corn, the okra. Now I didn't plant this whole area, as you notice, a lot of area. That's all I planted, what you're seeing there on that photo. That was all I planted in this area. It was just an experiment. I want to see how it would do. You can see there where from the fence, how deep the wood chips are. They're about a foot along the edge of the fence. A lot of the wood chips settled, and you can see I've got a pile of wood chips there in the left of the picture. So I still had a lot to, you know, in case I needed some additional ones. But it was very deep. It was a good foot of wood chips. They did settle a lot, and I'm, you know, letting you know they will settle. So if you put them out a foot, after about the first growing season, you know, 6-7 months later, they'll settle down, and you know, you probably have about 8 inches. So here we go, August 20th picture, and you can see okra is just sky high. The lower left-hand corner is a box that I grew purple hull peas, and it was just full of purple hull peas. Again, my boxes had nothing in them but compost. So you can see here again, the okra in the box is taller than the okra that's planted in the ground. And that is okra planted in the ground that was tilled. And I tilled it down about a good 18 to 20 inches with a rear tine tiller, and then took my cultivator and broke it up very loose. So the ground had been tilled thoroughly. All the grass root balls had been removed, and we still have the compost outperforming it. And in 2017, I added no new compost to those boxes. So that was compost that had, the last compost that was added to those boxes was in the spring of 2016. And yet it outperformed the okra that was planted in the ground. So let's go on to what our next picture is here. Oh, there's some more pictures. More pictures of okra, August 20th. And naturally, you can tell I had more okra from the yard than I knew what to do with. So my conclusion as far as growing in the wood chips is it absolutely, unquestionably was successful. I spent no time all summer in 2017 pulling weeds. Now you can see in this picture here, you see the grass. That's that Johnson grass. And it's vines. It can run from my yard, it can run under those wood chips and then come up. So I've got to get in there and pull it out. It's dead now, of course, in early spring like this. And I've got to pull the whole vines out, and as soon as I see any pop up, I'll spray it and try to kill the plants, spraying it with 100% saline salt solution, which I use that for killing weeds because it's perfectly safe and healthy, and I can spray it in my garden. And I got that tip from Paul Gauci. That's what he does, and for a weed killer, and you can kill the weed that you spray it on, and it doesn't kill everything in your garden or your yard, and it's not toxic going into the streams and everything. And it's dirt cheap. Salt's very cheap. And just use table salt. So I'm sold on it. I encourage you to use it. Start doing it. Do not till the wood chips or mix them into the soil. Someone did that, and they couldn't understand why all their plants did nothing. It was terrible. You can't till them into the soil. They're not to be done that way. They're to be put on top of the soil that you're growing in as a covering. So they cover the soil. They help retain moisture in the soil when it's dry, and they help to pull up. They help insulate. So temperature, I wish I would have put the picture in here. I had pictures that I took video and pictures of when we had snow here, when the snow melted in the yard on the wood chips for days, maybe even a week, there was still snow. And what that showed was the temperature that the wood chips were insulating very well. They insulated the ground and were able to have air moving through them, which kept the snow colder than the snow that was lying on the ground. That there was no air moving between the snow and the ground, and the ground, once it warmed up, then it melted the snow, like what happens on people's roofs. So when I saw that, I took pictures of it because I was like, wow, I got to tell Paul Gauci about this, because this is a photograph, a photograph evidence that these wood chips are allowing air to circulate between the snow and the ground, and keeping the temperature on top colder than the temperature on the ground next to my wood chips where all the snow is melted. And it stayed that way for days, if not a week. So it was a great success. I absolutely encourage it. I will do, as once you scale up to very large commercial farming, I don't know how practical it'll be. I don't know if you could get the chips and those type of issues, and depends on what you're growing and how it has to be harvested and a lot of those factors. But for anyone who's just a small farmer, you could go with the wood chips. You won't spend any time weeding to amount to anything, because unless you have Johnson grass like this, that's the only kind of weeds that showed up in the garden in 2017. Not one weed, not one blade of grass came through the wood chips in the area that I didn't even cover. So just this vining grass, I believe it's Johnson grass. So I highly encourage you start using the wood chip Back to Eden gardening method. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then look it up, Back to Eden. And when you see videos on YouTube with Paul Gauci, he's the one who's really made this popular and gives just dozens and dozens of excellent gardening tips. So take a look and check him out whenever you get a chance. So until next time, this is St. Louis Gardener signing off.